Hi again from Ian Hurd. This is the third short video in a short series about Daniel and his friends. This will possibly be the last, and I've called this one What God Thought of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the characteristic that most stands out to us when we think about Nebuchadnezzar is pride. Here's a man who had built a vast and vastly significant and powerful kingdom with a capital city, the likes of which the world had never really seen. A couple of chariots abreast could ride around the top of the wall that surrounded this vast city. The fabulous Ishtar Gate led those entering the city onto a grand, wide avenue through the city centre, with wide streets and bazaars and canals and waterways, avenues, and then of course in the middle of town, that huge artifice, the artificial mountain that Nebuchadnezzar had built, complete with its fabulous hanging gardens. It was a monument to what man can do, to what's possible in man's strength. And Babylon, of course, came to represent, and always represents, that which is the polar opposite of Israel and the people of God, and indeed of God himself. It's the antithesis of Jerusalem. Since the days of Babel, Babylon has represented what man builds and what arises from the heart of man. Jerusalem represents what comes from the heart of God. And as king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar represented fleshly rulership and the pride of man. And he functioned in an environment of pride and was surrounded by people of great ambition and self-seeking. And so one of the central themes of the book of Daniel is that nothing and no one is too far from God's redemptive work. In fact, the book is a living parable and a demonstration of what is possible with God, and of what's possible when human pride and self-trust encounters or comes up against true humility and absolute trust in God. And what we see is that humility and dependence on God will actually always win the day. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was a troubled man. In the midst of this prideful trajectory, he had been shown, had manifest to him the very opposite, the humility and the courage of God's men, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not only that, he had seen the gifts of God at work and beheld the miraculous and the very presence of God and the fourth man in the fiery furnace. And he certainly wanted these men on his team. But he was a man who had accomplished great things all on his own. And like so many today, his inner thinking was, why would I need that? I do not need anything else. I am the great Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, he was known as Nebuchadnezzar the Great. I've managed to bring the world to my feet without the God that these men profess. And this is what pride does. It makes us succumb to flattery and ego. It tells us that we are the most important person in the world, and it blinds us. And here in Nebuchadnezzar the Great, we have pride exemplified as having once made an attempt at humility after seeing what God did. He then again succumbs and struts about the palace rooftop, reassuring himself. Yes, this is the voice of a man who's becoming troubled and insecure. This is the voice of a man who is, like Saul of Tarsus much later, kicking against the goads that God is prodding him with. So he says, "Is not this the great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and by the honour of my majesty?" You'll notice it's in the form of a question because there's a great questioning going on within Nebuchadnezzar's heart. Which leads to my question, what did God think of Nebuchadnezzar? To which the answer is, he thought enough of him to go after him. Enough to sovereignly and miraculously bring these 4 men into his orbit, and enough to seriously challenge his mindset and ideology of pridefulness. Enough to bring him to realize that the true sovereign, the one who really was in charge of things, the God of Daniel and his friends, was actually the one who had permitted him to rise, and then to demonstrate to him that he could just as easily take his kingdom and take all away from him. And he lost his kingdom for a season. He became insane and out of control until the day when he repented and truly fell at God's feet. Here it is from Daniel chapter 4. These are Nebuchadnezzar's words. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity was restored to me. Then I praised the Most High, and I honoured and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does as he pleases with the army of heaven and the peoples of the earth. There is no one who can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time my sanity was restored, my honour and splendour returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisers and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the God of heaven, for all his works are true and all his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. We should never ever feel that a person or a system is beyond God's redemption. It seems to me that God went out after Nebuchadnezzar to make this very point. It's a living parable to encourage us. The 4 men whom God brought into this prideful man's life were men of trust and humility and men of prayer, as is clear from the record. The kind of people God desires us to be and desires his church to be if we are to see the prideful and arrogant and self-promoting repent. They were men God could use to bring about an extraordinary conversion of perhaps the most prideful man on earth, so that that man wrote out of heartfelt recognition those wonderful words, "I praise and glorify the King of heaven." He recognized another king. For all his works are true, and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. You know, it is better to humble ourselves than to have God humble us as he did Nebuchadnezzar. My advice is, never ask God to humble you. Rather, humble yourself. As Peter says, "Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." There's the secret which some translations miss. They make 2 sentences and 2 verses out of this. They say, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." They put a full stop there and then say, "Cast all your care on him," when in fact that's not what the Greek says. It says, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, casting all your care on him." And as you read the record, you'll find that that's what Daniel and his friends did. They humbled themselves by giving it all over, casting it all on him. In Peter, the verb is aorist active. It means casting or having cast. That's exactly what these dear men did. They got themselves out of the way and trusted God to work, and oh, how he worked. May God enable us each to walk not in pride as Nebuchadnezzar did, but in the humility of that total, that absolute trust in God. I pray this will bless you, and I pray that I and we will humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he can do the things he wants to do and can show the prideful himself at work for his praise and for his glory. God bless you.